4 years ago, on the day after Christmas, my family and I went for a hike in the snowy forests of Connecticut. My parents and I always headed down there around the holidays because it's where my grandparents live. And over the years past, it's become a family tradition. The morning following Christmas Day, we all knew it was in store. Every year, my Aunt Carol asked around the house to see if anyone would join her on a nature walk through the woods behind the house. No one ever agreed to go, due to the fact that the kids were too busy playing with their toys and the adults were quite hungover from all the Christmas spirit. Despite this, she was persistent, and Aunt Carol wasn't going alone this year. An hour later, by some miracle, she managed to bribe all 14 of us into coming along with her on the hike from hell. I asked my dad why we had to go, and all he said was, "Please humor her." As the whole gang filed out the door, one sad facial expression after the other, we walked our way down the path that led to the nature trail. We looked more like a row of prison inmates than one big happy family. Amazingly, after a few minutes though, most of us were starting to enjoy our little family adventure. Everybody had kind of turned their frown upside down. Sure, no one ever wanted to be trapped with Aunt Carol for more than 10 minutes, but when we all came together, it was impossible to not have fun. We were always that way, tight as a knot. After walking for just about 45 minutes, the troop came to a river bridge. In no way was its size intimidating, but it was obvious the bridge was on its last legs, and the water passing under it was flowing with a ferocious pace. Thinking this was man versus wild and she was Bear Grylls, Aunt Carol decided to cross first and investigate. For some odd reason, unbeknownst to me now, I asked if I could come across with her. I regret making that decision. My parents gave her the approving nod, and the two of us proceeded to slowly cross the bridge, inching closer to the opposite side with precaution. Just as we hit the halfway point, the centuries-old wood began buckling beneath us, and seconds before it snapped, I leaped forward. The wooden beams supporting the underside of the bridge continued to crack, echoing like gunfire throughout the trees. I took a few more lunges toward the other bank and finally set feet on stable ground. It felt like an entire episode had happened in slow motion, but I realized it had only been a brief moment. I was 1 second away from celebrating my successful crossing until I turned around to see what had happened to my Aunt Carol. As she turned back to get off at the other side, her foot had fallen through one of the holes in the boards that had cracked, leaving her leg in tatters. It was bleeding everywhere. My dad helped her over to the other side and immediately tried to stop the bleeding. I only realized how serious it was when I caught a glimpse of the fear in his eye, as if he knew everything was going to end badly. As I watched the panic on the opposite side unravel, I was conspiring theories on how I was going to get back across, but I couldn't think of anything because I was panicking. My dad, along with his two brothers, slowly lifted Aunt Carol from the snow and began shouting out directions to everyone like a drill sergeant. He told my mom and the rest of the group to stay put and to figure out exactly how I was going to get back across to them, while the three brothers would take her back to the beginning of the trail. Just after my father left, I decided it would be a good idea to try and find my own way back, maybe find a shallower crossing upstream. This seemed like the most logical decision at the time, but I was clearly wrong. Without realizing, as I was walking up the river, it had split, putting me farther and farther away from them. I was eventually completely lost, without cell phone coverage. I was in the middle of a forest. There was no use. I walked around for what seemed like days, finding it harder and harder to remember which way I had come from. Eventually, after several rounds of walking in circles, I gave up and sat by a rock, hoping I would eventually hear the voice of someone coming to find me. Just before I thought all hope was lost, I heard the sound of a man's voice. Not recognizable, but a total relief nonetheless. He was yelling my name, and I knew it was all over. I was by myself for 5 hours and 13 minutes before being found by search and rescue. I have never been more scared than that day in my life, and is the most memorable moment that has ever happened. An experience that is completely unforgettable, and it's truly amazing how the tides can change in an instance.